Hey, what's going on? Los Angeles, what's up, Trojan Nation? Welcome to the Salute to Troy podcast here on the LAFB network. Excited to be joined by my good friend, the best in the biz, Jamal Madman. Madney, what is up, man? How you been?
Good, Rye. Great to see you. Always such a pleasure and excited, man. I mean, it's sort of a meta episode, isn't it? Where it's like media talking about media day, And so this is going to be a fun one, and always such a pleasure to do it with you.
Yes, great seeing you. And no coach tonight. He was supposed to be here. I'm guessing he's asleep. We were joking before, like he just, sometimes he just falls asleep.
It's a tough job. I mean, being head coach of a program is a tough job. Just ask Lincoln Riley, right? So it's a tough job for coach. So hopefully he's getting some nice Z's.
Yeah. So, and those that don't know, he still works his day. So he's out of the house at like 4 a.m. and then gone till whenever practice is over. So, we give him some grace there. He's still here. He'll be back eventually, but always good seeing you, Madman, and excited to talk about this big, I guess, opening introductory press conference for most of the new hires. Some of the director of personnel roles were announced by Lincoln Riley officially, but they were not there in attendance. But Lincoln Riley talked, got to meet Chad Bowden, the new general manager, got to meet the infamous Rob Ryan in his fun press conference, Chad Savage, the new tight end inside receivers coach, and then the great Trovon Reed, who's going to be a cornerback coach, who was awesome as well. So, we're just going to kind of talk about that, plus 2 signings. It's so funny, Madman. Like, I don't know if I know you remember. So I, of course, know you remember. But it's funny to think that like 3-4 years ago, like today was the big day.
Today was the day. No doubt.
Today was the day. And here it comes. The big news today was the coaching press conference, and nothing to do with National Signing Day. But the Trojans did have 2 new signings for the 25 class. So we can briefly talk on that. Where do you want to? We didn't really outline. Where do you want to start? Do you want to start with the signings or just jump into the coaches?
Sure. I mean, we can start with the signings and then kind of jump into to the pressers. Absolutely.
All right, let's do that quickly before let's pay the bills. Show is always brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. Head to betonline.ag today. The big game coming up. All the best game lines, money lines, game spreads, and obviously all the prop bets over under. What's your favorite prop bet? I'll just ask you that, Madman.
Ooh.
Super Bowl prop bet.
Yeah, Super Bowl prop bet. Oh, man, there's so many good ones. Wow.
I feel like even if you aren't anyone that doesn't like into sports betting, like my wife, for instance, but she loves throwing like $5 down on a prop bet or 10 or parlaying a couple props.
The one thing I'll say, Rye, is, and I know this is all SC, but I've got maybe an outlier take on the Super Bowl. I don't think we haven't talked about this. I haven't shared this with you. But I believe the Eagles are going to blow the Chiefs out.
Ooh. Okay.
I think it's going to be 27-10 Philly. I think that the way the Eagles just match up with the Chiefs, the 2 high safeties, their ability to run the ball, control the clock. I think it's going to be a game of few possessions. I think red zone is going to be critical. I think Philly's going to be able to kind of suffocate and shrink the field for Kansas City, a la the way Tampa Bay did a few years ago. And the way kind of Cincinnati did a few years ago as well. I just think this has been kind of a Cinderella run for the Chiefs this year. But I just think the Eagles have a chip on their shoulder. They're matched up well. I'm getting vibes of a huge upset here. And so I'm totally on the outlier here, Rye. But I think the Eagles are going to blow the Chiefs out.
I mean, I would be thrilled with that. So I would be I'm not even an Eagles fan, but I think as of many people are just not, don't want to see the Chiefs win again. So that'd be fantastic. Is it, and then we'll get to SC, I promise, but is it time, like, regardless of how this game goes, we haven't obviously talked about this, but like, is it time that Nick Sirianni gets considered like a good coach? Like, people still think he should be fired, and this is his second Super Bowl in 3 years.
No, it's unbelievable. He is, he's sort of like the NFL equivalent to sort of early Eric Spoelstra in the NBA, if you remember. When he was sort of, coaching the Heatles, and they lost in the finals the first year, and then that game 6 in Boston, they're like, look, man, if he doesn't win this game, they're all getting fired. They're all getting blown up. It's unbelievable. There are certain coaches, I don't know what it is, right? Whether it's personality, whether it's just the expectations of that franchise, the city, and the media market. But it just feels like it's all or nothing. And Sirianni's just one of those guys where it's all or nothing. I mean, he is, for me, one of the 5 or 6 best coaches in all of football.
Right?
I don't think there's really any doubt about that. Hopefully he gets, the respect that he deserves.
Yeah, I mean, because even you think this is now his third pairing of coordinators in just 3 years.
Yeah.
Because went to the Super Bowl, both got hired away, had 2 new ones. He fired those after last year and has 2 new ones again this year. Like, I think the guy's obviously a good coach. Like, whether you like him or not is another thing, and he's perfect for Philly too. Like, I mean, he is the Philly coach. Him and Vic Fangio, like that is like a match made in heaven to be in Philly. But anyway, so the Chiefs are on Bet Online at 1-point favorites. So take Madman's advice, go take the dog and the Eagles and win yourself some money. All that can be done at betonline.ag. Tell them the guys at the LAFB network sent you. So, all right, I think whatever anyone thinks, I think they're pretty underrated signings here. I think there's some pretty talented kids. You get Jaden Ramos, the edge, 3-star edge out of Texas. We'll start with him, and then we can talk about AJ Tuitele, the linebacker to North Las Vegas. But I think Jaden is a guy that, obviously probably didn't get talked about a lot throughout the process. When you're a 3-star, I think he was like the 90th rated edge or so on one of the websites. So lower down in there, but I'll just say this, like, dude finished with 18 sacks his senior year and like 36 and a half tackles for loss. He's 6'5", 240 frame, obviously going to put some weight on. So, I mean, what do you think, Madman? This is kind of one of those gems that with the right development and with the staff kind of that USC has built could maybe turn this into a real diamond in the rough.
No, absolutely, right. I'm very excited about this because you mentioned it. I mean, the building blocks are there at 6'5", 240. He actually sort of reminds me a lot of Cam Fountain about 15 or 18 months ago. And so when you sort of look at that particular frame and then you see what the coaches were able to do with Fountain, and we're expecting a huge year for him in 25, you get that similar type of regimen, and you can't really simulate success on the field, right? You mentioned it. When you've been that level of sack machine, when you've been able to get into the backfield that consistently, there's an instinct of the game. There's a knowledge of the game. There's a comfort with being an edge. Now, obviously, once you go up to the next level, the game's faster, it's stronger, it's more physical. You have to be sort of on your P's and Q's in a more significant way. But those are all teachable things. Those are all things that through development with the right coaching staff, you can then elevate to that next level of play on the field. But you can't teach those intangibles of understanding movement and counter movement and having a knack and an instinct for where a quarterback or a running back is going to sort of lean towards or where they're going to kind of habituate to. So I'm really excited about Ramos, and the fact that he is 3-star, the fact that he is under the radar. I think he's going to come in with the right attitude, ready to work, no distractions, probably a bargain from an NIL perspective. So there's a ton to like here in terms of upside. And I think if we've learned anything over the last year or so, you can never have too many defensive linemen and edges, particularly in this Big Ten, particularly as the season gets longer now to 16, potentially 17 games.
Yeah, so well said. And we'll get to the coaches obviously in a minute, but it goes in line with what Trovon Reed said. And one of his quotes was, if you're a dog, we'll find you. Like, if you're a dog, we'll find you. And then his other quote, which was one of my favorites, was, I'm going to turn 3-stars into 5-stars and 5-stars into first-round picks. So this is your potential 3-star player that flew under the radar. And all of a sudden, and obviously Trovon Reed coaches cornerbacks, not edge and line, but it's all within the coaching staff and the philosophy. And obviously with Coach Henney and Coach Nua on that staff, they'll do that. So, I mean, Madman, like, obviously Jakeem Stewart's the star in this class, and rightfully so. And I have super high expectations, but also a lot of excitement for what he can be. But when it's all said and done, we may be talking about Gus Cardova and Jaden Ramos as the 2 steals of this class, being both 3-star Texas kids that just put a ton of production on tape, both 6'5", both in that 240, 250 range, and just flat out could play and were dogs. And that's kind of what the theme seems to be. So, I mean, we could be talking about these 2 guys in reality in the next 2 to 3 years, which is exciting.
No doubt about it, Rye. I couldn't have said it better myself. What's interesting is the juxtaposition between a Cordova and a Ramos and Jakeem, right? Mm-hmm. Because Jakeem, it just sort of wows you on film, and everything that he's done up until this point, the explosiveness out of his break, just everything that he's got in terms of strength. He's got, that diameter. He can go side to side so beautifully. But Jakeem didn't play this year, right? And so it's so interesting. It's going to be so fascinating to see how much of a role that plays into going into that first year. And that's what I'm really excited about. Where is Jakeem just sort of this savant where it just doesn't matter, like just roll the ball out. I'm going to be a dominant player from day one, no matter what and under what circumstance. Or perhaps is the learning curve going to be a little bit longer than something that's immediate, and he's still going to sort of reach his 5-star and superstar potential, but maybe that curve is a little longer, and maybe a Ramos and a Cordova maybe jump out of the gates a little bit faster, relatively speaking, and then kind of Jakeem catches up later and sort of passes them just because of natural raw ability, or they're going to sort of play to their stars right away, and the development is going to sort of follow similar paths for each of them. I think it's just going to be really interesting to see how much that year right before coming to USC plays a role, and I think it'll be fascinating to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is going to be a huge offseason, and obviously all these kids getting on campus now with spring ball. So the next kid we'll talk about, another 3-4-star fringe, depending which site you go to, AJ Tuitele, the linebacker out of North Las Vegas. Really, honestly, fortunate for the Trojans because he was committed to Washington State when Jake Dickert and his staff left for Wake Forest. He was able to decommit and get out of his, can't think of the word right now, but the financial aid, I guess you'd call it. And because of, the circumstances. And so gets into the portal, I guess, quickly with that. And SC, offers him pretty quickly after that. He was on campus the weekend of the 18th. So what is that, 2 weeks ago? And had suitors like Texas and some other schools out there. And I'll toss it to you, Jamal, but I would just say the thing I noticed briefly, because obviously this happened very quickly. He wasn't really on our radar till recent, but a guy that was kind of a late bloomer. And so not a guy that has that junior tape. It seems like nowadays in recruiting, it's kind of like, what'd you do junior year? And a lot of these guys almost like shut it down their senior year or play very sparingly. Whereas he was kind of the opposite, kind of an unknown guy, and then really exploded his senior year. And so is coming into this season, like really hot, coming off a hot campaign, and becomes just the second linebacker in this class with Matai. And I think he's another talented kid, though. 6'3", 205, has that right size frame. And guess what? He gets to go play with Rob Ryan and see what can go from there. So I think this is another great pickup.
No, another huge pickup, Ryan. Again, it's a position of need, right? I mean, you talked about Matai and I think expecting some really nice things out of both of these incoming players. But I think if you look at the landscape of the linebacker room right now, losing Cobb, losing the players that we have over the past few months, it's really kind of Eric Gentry and it's Stevens are really kind of the top two guys right now. You love Gentry, and it's going to be, we'll get to it in a bit, but what Ryan can do with Gentry, and I know he sort of alluded to it today as well, I think is going to be fascinating. But you always worry a little bit about Gentry with injuries, just given the frame. He's just such a unique body. I always sort of, and you know this, Ryan, I'm such a huge tennis fan. Gentry is kind of like Rafa Nadal. It's like the body doesn't go with the sport and the position, but he's got such a great motor that he makes it work. So you're always worried a little bit about injury with Gentry. Stevens obviously showed tremendous flashes, had that great Penn State game in particular. So I think bringing these two in to sort of fortify, I think is going to be really, really critical. And you're talking about SC, again, acting quickly for someone that was recruited, like you said, by Texas, was recruited by Arizona State coming off of that Cinderella playoff berth. So the ability to sort of close quickly here, again, very, very significant, very exciting. And I think that sort of closes the class here. Some classes, recruiting agencies, I have SC around 15, 16. It seems like that's sort of where this is netted out moving forward for 25.
Yep. Yeah, it looks like that. And they can put a bow on this class now. And obviously there'll be, the transfer portal, the spring window opening. Hopefully Madman in a year or two, we'll just have one window. I think it's so silly having both personally. That's a whole other conversation, but they'll have that opportunity to add more in that spring window with currently, I think 10 transfer portal players. That's another conversation. So
no doubt. It's so funny quickly about the junior day and then this whole idea of the junior tape, right? It's becoming so much more like how we went to high school. Remember, like when we were in high school, like junior year was everything because like that was the year like you took the SATs or the ACT and whatnot, and then senior year, first semester was just all about applying to college, and you still want to do well, but it's more about the courses you're taking in senior year more than your production itself. And then second semester, senior year is just like don't flunk out and don't just go too crazy having a good time. and everything's going to be fine. It's so interesting how like that's starting to sort of reveal itself in these recruiting processes.
Yeah, it's so true. I guess they get to be like normal high school kids.
Yeah.
Because I like took the entire senior year off basically. I was just taking like basket weaving, and I had like a 0 period and got to sleep in. Like, yeah, it was great.
Hey, listen, Liner took ballroom dance senior year when he was at SC. So it applies to senior year of college too when you're sort of presumably a lottery pick in the NFL draft. So
I'm sure a lot of those SC players are taking some classes like that throughout their collegiate career. But all right, well, let's turn to this coaching, this new, I guess, hires, and we won't spend a ton of time on it, but I think just it was a fun press conference to get to kind of meet these guys. And so Madman, we might as well just go down the list. We'll just keep it easy. So we'll start with Lincoln Riley had his opening press conference. I don't know if you want to get into that at all. I think, I said some good things. He ended up talking for like 10 minutes after his allotted time and took more questions, which is always nice. But I don't know if there's anything you noticed from that at all. I mean, obviously I can speak on it. I was there today, which was great, but if there's anything you wanted to touch on.
Raya, nothing specific about necessarily what he said, but I think all of the conversations that led to, I think, his presser today have been very impressive. And I think he's taken a page out of Ryan Day's book. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you really think about Ryan Day last year, offensive minded, hot seat, knowing that this had to be a make it or break it year, what did he do? He went and hired an offensive coordinator in Chip Kelly. I think there's a recognition here that this head coaching role in today's modern college football, we've talked about this a bunch, is more like a CEO. And, I think the way the real world would work is the CEO would say, I never want to be more of an expert than any of my like individual direct reports who are like focused on one thing, whether it's like accounting or business development or like engineering or what have you. I shouldn't be smarter than them in their role. And my job is to sort of set the vision, set the bigger picture, establish the culture, set everyone up for success, and kind of create the system around everyone to succeed. And it really sounds like Lincoln Riley is taking that approach in the right way, where obviously giving up the play calling duties now. Heward is now officially the offensive coordinator. So much of what he talked about, and we'll talk about it as well with Bowden, and saying, look, I really am giving him a lot of the keys to the kingdom here. We talked about how much of a general manager role is this going to be relative to what the NFL archetype would be. It sounds like he's really leaning in and saying it's a partnership, but Bowden and his team are really going to be responsible for the recruiting and for putting this roster together. I'm giving Heward the keys to the offensive play calling. We obviously know what's going on with Lynn and Ryan. It really feels like he is taking a much more CEO approach. And for someone who's had so much success as an individual play caller and an offensive mind, I think it shows a tremendous amount of maturity. So I was really happy to see, even in the comments that he made today, kind of alluding to that. And I think the recognition that this CEO type of approach really works. It just worked, a few weeks ago with Ohio State and Ryan Day. And there's a recipe here of putting the right people around you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the thing that I took away was, and who knows how much of this is gaslighting or what, but I think everyone on the outside was, and rightfully so, but like kind of hammering like what's taking so long with this GM role. Even we've talked about it, and it's absolutely fair criticism because they were behind the times with it. They really were. But I think the fact of him saying like this was like a really long process. We've been talking for a long time, interviewing countless deaths. It's the most, I want to say, not paraphrasing, but basically it was the most intense and long interview process he's ever been a part of. And so really leaving no stone unturned to where they ended up landing on Chad Bowden. And it seems just like an absolute home run hire. So I think the due diligence in that, and I know everyone would have wanted this to happen a year ago, 2 years ago, but we're sitting here now looking at it from a positive lens, like who knows, but what if a year ago they hired someone that ended up being a bad hire, that it flames out, it pushes the can, kicks the can 2 years down the line, but then they're doing this whole process again because they didn't get to where they need to be. We'll see if this was the right hire. Obviously, it still has to play out, but it seems like the process they used in going through college, through NFL, through businesses, and really interviewing the whole juxtaposition of kind of that side of that of the program, kind of landing on Bowden as the guy to run it. I think that's exciting, and it shows a good a an ability to work together. I think one thing that you brought up, I brought up, Coach, is like how much is Lincoln Riley in control of everything, or how much, as you just mentioned, too, is he kind of giving the keys to other? How much does Jen Cohen have a say? And it seems like it was really collaborative effort between the powers that be to come on the right solution to get them the right play. And he mentioned too, there'll be a few other hires that'll be announced. I don't know how many more. Obviously one happened. Max Steinecker, another GM from Wisconsin, who they didn't announce today, but he was officially announced by USC on Monday.
All of 22 years old, Ryan,
24 now, but
24 now, yeah.
22. He was the youngest director of personnel at 22. Yeah, so that was kind of my takeaway, just him talking about how long the process was, which, again, who knows if it was gaslighting, but hey, all we can take is for what people say, and I'll take it. I like it.
No, absolutely, Ryan. And I think the other kind of macro takeaway from the day of just sort of observing it is I think there's a genuine camaraderie and respect with this coaching staff. And I think, Rob Ryan alluded to it, and I know we'll get into more details, but he's the type of guy where, and he even talked about it, where are these guys serious or not? And, the fact that you sort of passed the Rob Ryan, sniff test, and he talked so much. He was very praiseworthy of both Lincoln as well as Danton Lynn, and just, what great leaders they are, great teachers they are. So he was very excited. And I think that just that idea of camaraderie across everybody who was at the podium today was very, very evident. And granted, I think we felt some of that last year at the media presser as well, with the likes of Entz and Danton and so on and so forth. But really feels like that was built upon and felt perhaps even more. And it might have been just a product of newer faces this particular year, but there's a genuine camaraderie and a connection here. Everybody knows that they're on their same page. And, it's sort of that saying, Ryan, enjoy the good old days while you're in them. And I think this is probably one of the best coaching and administrative staffs in all of college football. And you could argue on paper it might be the very best. And you just don't know how long the band will be together. This might just be the one year that all of them are together. So I think they probably recognize that a little bit too. And let's see it all kind of materialize. But they're saying all the right things, and I think there's a genuine respect and camaraderie and appreciation for one another. And those are the building blocks upon which culture is built.
Yeah, 100%. And I think last thing I'll say on that, like, obviously, I'm not sugarcoating this at all. Like 8-5 and 7-6 is not acceptable at USC. Like, we all know that. But clearly, around league circles, Lincoln Riley still is held in high regard among other coaches and staff members, and people want to work with him. And so there's clearly still a respect there that they can see it, whatever it is behind the scenes, they can see the vision. And, he mentions, we're building something, and, we got to see it play out. We got to see some wins on the field, but there is clearly some belief there and some respect there that was able to pull in guys from, again, this is not someone from like Texas State getting an upgraded position. These are guys at like premier schools, basically taking a sideline job. There was probably a pay bump, I'm guessing that helps a little bit, but still, like, it's impressive of some of these guys they're able to get. So let's go to Chad Bowden now, who, thing I'll say, and I don't know if you could tell from, part of it was before I think the press conference even started, but the dude has energy. And I think that was really exciting to see. I mean, a lot of the staff obviously is young, so you can see the energy there, but then even the old guy, Rob Ryan, there's energy there. So that was the real theme that I noticed was just an energy that's palpable among this group. And Bowden, talked about his philosophy, and I don't think you can touch on it if you want. I don't think we need to spend too much time on it, but obviously what he believes and how you build relationships in this. But I think his energy, and then the fact that he at least said how much USC meant to him and wanted to be here. I think the big quote that was going around, and rightfully so, was, "Hey, Notre Dame tried everything to keep me. USC just meant more to me." And I think back, Madman, to when, we've all talked about this, but I think always back when Candace was doing the show with us, and she would always harp on, and she was more so on like just hiring USC people, but her big message was like, we need people that want to be Trojans.
Yep.
People need to be USC Trojans. They have to bleed Cardinal and gold. And not only was that a theme with the whole staff, but specifically Bowden saying like USC meant more to me. Like, I grew up watching Leinart and Reggie and Lendell and Jared and these guys. And so when they came calling this opportunity came, it was like a no-brainer. Like, yes, I wanted to be at USC because it meant something to be in LA. He called it the greatest city in America. So I think that should get people fired up, because I think that's been like kind of the one missing piece. Is I don't think anyone that's been previously on this staff, or you could even say Clay Helton, like didn't realize how great of a job this is or how great of a program it is. But I don't know if everyone's appreciated the magnitude of what it is to be a USC Trojan. And it seems like these newer hires, even with Dan Lynn turning down Penn State to come back, like there seems to be more of this, like, no, this is as they coined it on social media, this is the place to be. And so that was like my big takeaway from Bowden.
Yeah, no, really well said, Ryan. And with Bowden, you mentioned the energy, and it was certainly palpable. But I'll be honest with you, I was also blown away with his poise. I thought back and I said, man, this guy's only 30. Like, he's barely 30. And the way he sort of commanded the podium and the way he answered the questions and his body language and just his comfort level was very, very evident. And it was more like a 45 or a 55-year-old person was up there than a 30-year-old. And you can tell not just how much sort of SC meant to him, but just how much being a GM is in his blood. And I know one of the questions was about his dad and what it meant. And my God, I mean, there's no other way to sort of learn that in as deep a way as being sort of grown up in it. Your dad's the youngest GM in all of Major League Baseball at 31 with the Cincinnati Reds. That's a unique education that a handful of people on earth can get, given timing and all of those things. So you can tell it's in his blood. He was destined to do it. He talked about it's something that he wanted to do at a very young age. And like you mentioned, Rai, I was struck by how much that mid-2000s run meant to him. He talked about USC being his childhood team. And, you got to take a step back here. He's 30. The Leinart and Bush era was 20 years ago. He was 10, yeah. But it was truly his childhood team. And, then there's something about the magic of discovering your team as a child that just sort of stays with you forever. And I think that was that connection and that love and affection and admiration that he had for USC as like his home team. Because I believe it was Scott Schrader asked the question of, you had a really good thing at Notre Dame. Notre Dame is a big time name. You have a great relationship with Marcus Freeman, the head coach. Like, there's a run here to be able to be made. And as you mentioned, Ryan, he alluded that, look, Notre Dame tried everything, but this place just meant to me more. And, it's, you don't sort of make decisions oftentimes with the numbers. You make it with your heart and your gut and your intuition. And those are the types of people that you want who also have tremendous competence. And I think that's been the missing ingredient, to your point, the last few years. We've either had just these sort of numbers analytical guys or these guys that are sort of really, really passionate, but the competence was into question. And with Bowden, it feels like he's the best of all worlds. I really loved also what he said about we're going to major in high school recruiting and we're going to minor in the portal. And I thought that was a terrific way of framing it. And his rationale was it's all about the culture, because you are able to establish a culture even before the athlete steps on your campus and on your field for your program, because that becomes now a domino effect. They are now representing your school as a commit, and that those behaviors get embedded even before they show up. And then other people see those behaviors, and it becomes this infectious domino effect in such a positive way. And I love the foresight of what he said, where he said, look, you're not just recruiting the player, you're recruiting the family. And it's something that we've talked about so much, about how do you sort of relate to the family. Really, really important. And then I really loved what he said about, kind of his attack philosophy. And, you can either have sort of this sport be played upon you, or you can sort of be proactive and really sort of attack decisions and attack problems, and recognizing that nothing about tomorrow is guaranteed, particularly in this world of college football 24/7. So the best you can do is do, your absolute best to attack every day, the present day, and set yourself up for tomorrow. And then whatever tomorrow brings, so be it. So just, I think his attack mindset, his love for USC, this sort of approach to high school recruiting, which I think we've talked about is so important. And then you can sort of pick and choose some guys in the portal based on positions of need. And then I think, again, overall his poise. I mean, he got baited into some questions of like, how do you think about the roster right now? And how do you think about, your overall strategy? And he's like, or how was the hiring cycle for you? And, just so astutely, he was able to say, look, I'm not going to answer that here. I'm not going to get into that here. Just the savvy at 30 was impressive. And, he hasn't been in this job very long. And my only fear is that, we overpaid Lincoln, you could argue, for a minimal amount of success that was really great. But when you have a short amount of success, sometimes you don't know what the causes of those successes are. Bowden has only been in this actual job for 1 year. So that's my one concern. But the fact of how he demonstrated himself today, it's very obvious why and how he was able to sort of blow away Lincoln Riley and Jen Cohen in the interview process and stand tall. So I think we should be all very excited about Boy Wonder here, is Goodwill Hunting, aka Chad Bowden.
He kind of reminded me in a sense, and this will be a perfect transition because Rob Ryan kind of brought it up too, but he reminded me in a sense of when Sean McVay was hired by the Rams as the youngest coach, and everyone's like, well, this dude's 30 years old and you're giving him the keys to an NFL franchise. And then you hear him talk and you're like, holy cow, there's something different. Like, yeah, we got to see it happen. How will he actually relate to a locker room? Can he actually lead like men when he's still so young? But when you heard his like opening press conference as a coach, and when you see him like on the field early in those coaching days, you could see he had something different. Like he was born for that role. And Bowden seems like that. Now we'll see it play out, but obviously in 1 year, Notre Dame went to the Natty. So obviously we saw a little bit of it, but now we'll see if he can have that long standing like you alluded to. But there's definitely something there. And there's something Madman too, when you can just sense early on that someone can relate to someone, right?
Yeah.
Like we've all met tons of people, and whether it's in sports or business or whatever. And there's sometimes you meet people that are really smart and good at what they do. But you're like, oh man, is this guy going to like resonate with people? Like, is anyone going to connect with him at all? Like, yeah, I understand what they're saying. Like they're geniuses, but like, can anyone actually like connect? Bowden, you can tell like kids are going to love him. Like anyone he talks to, like they're just going to have a blast talking to him. Like, yeah, this guy's great. Like even though he's not the coach, like I'll just want to go hang out with him. And he sold me on Lincoln's balsamic steaks. Apparently those are must haves. Yeah. So
that's
I think
awesome.
We gotta get that somehow over to the LAFB.
The casita, man. And Lincoln's casita feels like it's the place to be, right? In 10 days at Casa Riley, with those balsamic steaks. You got to love it.
Must be nice. So, yeah, what's going on, family? Got to quickly tell you about our friends over at Underdog Fantasy, new sponsor and friend of the show. One of the most fun games out there, fantasy games you can do in the industry today. Super easy to do. Go to the App Store or go to UnderdogFantasy.com. Download today. Use our promo code LAFB, or you can just click the link in the description wherever you are watching. That promo code is going to give the new user that you have just become a free pick, one free pick, and up to $1,000 in bonus cash. That's free money. Up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Why would you not want to do that for a simple deposit? Just make sure to use that promo code LAFB or click the link below. The game is super easy. It's super fun. Pick 2 to 8 players in a game. Go ahead and go with the higher or lower, whether they're going to have more passing yards, touchdowns, receiving yards, rushing yards, any of that. It's a lot of fun. And just choose higher or lower. That's easy with the opportunity to win. So, go to Underdog Fantasy today. Promo code LAFB gets you a free entry and up to $1,000 bonus cash. Well, okay, let's transition to, I guess the man of the hour. I mean, as great as Bowden was, like, holy cow, Rob Ryan. I mean, this isn't trying to be a humble brag or anything, but I've been in quite a few press conferences now. You've been in quite a few. This was by far the most fun of what I've ever been in Rob Ryan, because it was like, you had no idea what you're going to get, but he somehow like tied everything back in. Like he'd go off on like a ramble tangent, but then he tied it into like answering the question beautifully. And you're like, oh, that was a really good thought out answer with like a nice, fun story in it. But it was, I think what I'll toss to you. So I want to talk to long, but I think just what I took away the most from it was he's just a football guy. Like he is just through and through a football guy. Everyone knows that. 25 years in the NFL, previous college experience. And, he said at the end, I can't remember what the question was at the very end, but basically said like, these kids are the same. Like, they're all alphas. Like, it doesn't matter with social media, the change of the times. Like, if you're a winner, you're a winner. You're going to be there. When I look at these kids, I see the same guy that I saw 25 years ago. And you can tell that's his mentality. And he's over here saying, like, I think we got, like, what's it called? Spring ball coming up. Like, he doesn't even know, like, the college acumen. But, like, I don't think that's going to matter because he knows football. And at the end of the day, as I think it was, I can't remember if it was him or maybe another, I think it was actually Trovon Reed that said it. But at the end of the day, I think Trovon Reed said, football's brown, the field's 100 yards. That doesn't change no matter what all the obstacles are outside of that. And so, but man, he was fun. I'll let you talk on it more, but he was just a fun listen.
Right. I'll be honest with you. I didn't know sort of what to expect going in. Like, the Ryan brothers are eccentric and they're entertaining. And so, I sort of was looking at it from the lens of, there'll be some fun quotes here. I'll have a couple chuckles. This will be an enjoyable next, 8, 10, 12 minutes, whatever it may be. I mean, Ryan was gnarly. I mean, the guy was on stage and he walked off stage and he was like pacing. I mean, the story about like Maeva's family and then the Hawaii, it's like, what are you talking about? I know the guy. I'm not going to say I know this guy. And then he goes off on that with the wife's romantic evening. And he's like, whatever, I mean, it just was unbelievable. How he sort of brought it all together, to your point, because you're like, man, where is this going? Like, what are you even talking about right now? Like, what is happening? Are you sure you're at the right place at the right time right now? But again, it just goes to show you that all of the logistics and the administration outside of college football, like, just tell Rob Ryan, like, the time and the field and, when practice is going to be and when film is going to be, and he's going to be right at home. And it's going to be such a breath of fresh air. I think in a lot of ways, Rye, he is going to be like the Joker card, on this staff. Like, I think he's going to be that breath of fresh air. Like, if the 2025 season, every season is going to have its speed bumps, its adversities, whatnot. Lynn is such a stoic guy. I think Ryan's going to be able to counter him with some energy and some passionate speeches in the locker room and kind of getting on guys if he needs to, while Lynn is kind of more of that surgical, pragmatic, sort of fiery person, although fiery internally. I think he's going to balance that well. I think Bowden alluded to using Ryan to doing, some elaborate things. You asked the question about, like, what's the thought around some elaborate recruiting tactics, like we talked about with Notre Dame. He wanted to have Marcus Freeman jump out of the airplane. Ryan, I think, is going to do some interesting things for recruiting. And I think he's also going to be a nice sounding board for Lincoln Riley from time to time. I think he's going to play this very, like, unique role. I think his role right now, his title is linebackers coach, but I think it's going to be that, and I think he's going to be this very, very unique rover. And the one thing I took a step back on, Ryan, is whether this was intentional or not by Jen Cohen, we're starting to see an emphasis on pedigree, right? Like, when we talk about Bowden and, like, his dad, and you talk about, where Ryan came from, from the legendary Buddy Ryan, and it's something that the Golden State Warriors, in kind of the heyday of Curry and Durant and all that, like, Lacob, their owner, was so big on pedigree, where, like, Steph was the son of a player, Klay Thompson was the son of a player, Draymond Green went to Michigan State with a great coach. They were so big on pedigree as sort of an element of their success. I don't know if it's intentional or it's just sort of happened that way, but we're starting to see a lot of pedigree on this staff. And I think that's only going to be a very good thing because of guys who have sort of grown up in these families, who have seen it and lived it and have the blood at such a young age. And in the case of Ryan, I mean, the resume speaks for itself. But again, it's that emphasis on sort of pedigree and Trojan, not necessarily Trojan blood, but just, having that ability to sort of know something so intuitively. So that also makes me very excited.
Yeah, well, it's a great point because, NIL changed everything, right, with the game, NIL, and it made it so, like, money bag chasing and all this. But in due time, especially with rev share, at least among the top, like, 25 programs, things are going to even out a little bit in terms of that. There'll still be, your Oregons and your Ohio States and Texases that maybe pay a little bit more, but it's going to be much more even. And so it kind of gets to that point where it's like, what do you separate now if you are that top 10, top 15 program, where obviously SC has the SC logo, Los Angeles, But what else can separate it when you have that pedigree of like, we've got 2 Super Bowl winning coaches on our staff. We've got sons of NFL coaches on our staff. We've got all this. It's like, that's different than Oregon right now, or different than Texas and
Totally.
stuff, because they don't have that. And so it's a great point that there is that kind of pedigree, whether it was intentional or not, certainly bodes in favor of them.
No question. No question. And I think that's, another that angle. And I'm also excited about Bowden recognizing the value of Los Angeles. And, we've talked about it so much. And he also emphasized California recruiting, that Trojan wall of, understanding that the best high school ball is played in this particular state. So, Ryan, they're saying all the right things. They've got the perfect kind of resumes. There's a meshing that's very, very obvious. So I think there's a ton to be excited about with this program and this particular staff. I mean, you sort of walk away blown away, really, by the competence, by the poise, by the camaraderie, and you feel very, very hopeful about what this season and beyond can bring. I think the only questions now, if we're sort of just looking at things holistically, one is, how long can this staff stay together, just because they're so desired in so many other ways? So how much of the nucleus of what they're doing can be repeatable and replicated even after they potentially leave after a year, let's say? And so how much do you make that sustaining? But that's where Lincoln's going to have to really be that CEO to really drive that culture and drive those values moving forward. And then number 2, Ryan, and I think what's interesting is the timing, right? We still have this April window, but even for a Bowden, and he sort of alluded to it, I think a lot of his work right now is about 26, right? We're talking about the 25 class being 15, 16, 26 class. This better than anyone, sitting at number 2 right now. It's early, but that's a class that's sort of shaping up where you're trying to be top 3. You're trying to be top 4. You're trying for that top spot. But the question becomes, if 25 becomes a season like 24 or 23, does Jen Cohen give Lincoln Riley and company enough rope to see this thing through and the work of a Bowden, sort of materialize? That's going to be the fascinating part. He's going to have to win enough with Maeva as his quarterback and with the 15th ranked recruiting class this year and with this roster to be able to get the opportunity to see where this thing can go.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's going to be the rope is going to be interesting to see. The last 2 things I'll say on Ryan, then we'll move on to Savage and Reed. Because I mean, if you guys haven't watched it, it's on our YouTube channel. So if you're watching on YouTube, just like scroll down the whole Rob Ryan. It's like 19 minutes long. It's gold. It's worth watching. So go watch it if you haven't. But the last 2 things I'll just mention. One, you mentioned Eric Gentry, and he talked. Obviously, hasn't met all the kids a ton, but he talked briefly on him. And there was one little thing. Whether, again, you never know if things are intentional or what. But he said one little thing. He was talking about his frame, and he said, "I'm going to teach him to hit before he gets hit." And we talk about how as great as Gentry is, the problem is his injuries and his concussions, obviously. And a lot of that is because when you're just hitting force, like, you get that risk of injury. So the fact that he's already thinking, like, I'm going to teach him to hit before he gets hit, use that long frame, that long body, like, that's just going to make Eric Gentry a better player, but also make him more available for this defense, because we saw, as improved as his defense was, it was completely different once Gentry was gone. Like, he was so integral to this defense, having that quick turnaround in the early part of the season. When he was out, you saw a significant drop off. So I thought that was cool. And then the other little thing, and this just goes on par with this whole staff talking about USC and the place to be. He was talking about, being with the Raiders, and he threw out there is like, I'm good friends with Mark Davis. Like, it didn't matter who was hired. Like, he's like, yeah, Pete Carroll's hired now. Like, I would have been on staff still if I wanted to be. Like, I'm paraphrasing, but basically, like, me and Mark Davis are good. I was good to stay there. But once this opportunity came, and I started thinking about it, and I talked to Danton, and then I talked to Lincoln, and he said, Lincoln Riley, I think Lincoln Riley and Sean McVay are the 2 brightest offensive minds in football. I've coached with Sean Payton. I've coached with the others. I don't care what anyone says. Those 2 are the brightest. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool to hear. 2 LA guys. But the fact that he's like, I could have stayed in Vegas and been there with Mark Davis in the NFL, but I wanted to come here. So it's just another cool thing on par of, like, people wanting to come to USC.
No question, Ryan. And it makes you sort of excited of somebody again of Ryan's sort of ilk, where if you sort of pass the legitimacy test, in every sort of industry, there's those graybeards, we call them. It's like, man, they're tough in a meeting, in a review, and you really have to sort of earn their respect because they've been there, they've done it, they've seen it all, and they can sort of sniff out the BS from somebody that really knows what they're talking about or knows what they're doing. And the fact that Lincoln Riley and D'Anton Lynn were able to do that with Rob Ryan, to me, is what is most significant and really should give all of the USC fans, all of the Trojan family, a lot of excitement. And Rye, I think that point about Gentry hitting before getting hit, I mean, it could be the single greatest determinant in many ways outside of Maeva of how this season is going to go for SC. I mean, let alone the season, Ryan. We saw it in that Minnesota game. Yeah. I mean, when Gentry was in the game versus when he got hurt in that moment across that Minnesota game, he tried to give it a go, and the defense just totally looked different without him, without that physicality. So with that long frame, if he can sort of launch into guys, identify guys, and in theory, he should be able to, just given the wingspan and given the quickness, he should be the guy sort of hitting first. So I think how that plays out schematically and has Gentry in the right spots, because then if Gentry's able to do that, now that zone shell concept for D'Anton Lynn all starts coming together, and there's sort of a domino effect there. So just gems from him, right? I mean, it's like, to your point, like it's like 4 minutes of rambling, you don't know what it is, and then boom, there's like a 6-second gem, and then there's like another 5 minutes of rambling, and then boom, there's a 4-second gem in there. So gotta love it.
It was so. I promised last time I was dying laughing at this. I've rewatched it, but when he's talking about, someone asked me about recruiting, and he's like, "Yeah, I was with Henny. Like everyone loves Henny." And then basically after he's talking the whole thing, he's like, "You kidding me? They wouldn't let me go by myself. I would have broken every rule imaginable. They didn't trust me to go by myself." It's like, oh, so great. So yeah, check that out. Worth the watch. And so let's get to Chad Savage. Poor guy had to follow Rob Ryan. He even mentioned that. Like, I'm going to be mad at Katie for making me go next. And so, we don't have to spend a ton of time on these next two, but I thought Chad Savage, we talked about it when he got hired, like a fantastic hire, a young guy, recruiter of the year from the Mountain West 3 years in a row, and has built a tremendous pipeline in Southern California. All these high school coaches have talked glowingly about Chad Savage, and that was when he was at Colorado State. Now he's going to be recruiting because of USC. So it's just like that pipeline he's created now transfers to the powers that is USC, alongside of him being an actual really good like tight end and receiver coach. So, he was asked a little bit about philosophy and his relationship building and how he kind of approaches his recruiting and also coaching. But Madman, I think just another home run hire, and just seems like a really, really good guy. Really excited to be here, obviously, but this was of the first kind of hires of like guys that like, wow, they just convinced them to come here. Like him and Reed were guys now seizing an opportunity, but deservedly so, and we'll just make this staff better.
No question about it, Ryan. I'll say two things. One is he alluded to it a little bit today, but the references were in some previous conversations, but just this whole 360-degree like assessment that he does of players, where with every interaction he will note things of interest to them, whether it's a particular style of play, whether it's something kind of cultural, whether it's something about on the field, academic, what have you, and then he makes sure to sort of circle back on that item in addition to the next things he wants to talk about in the subsequent conversation. Savage is almost like the AI note-taking tools that like a lot of companies use, but like, the human version of it, and the football version of it in a lot of ways. And he's just the science of recruiting with Savage is really interesting. And I think he had to be that precise and that strategic, being in the Mountain West and having kind of fewer shots on goal and really needing to make them count. So again, every time I hear him talk, again, just that competence goes through the roof. And I just, again, after Savage spoke, Ryan, I had to kind of take a step back and say, man, for every position group, you have an individual that either has a decorated resume or is an incredible recruiter or both. And so the fact that you can also layer these guys on top of each other if you need to go get certain players, you can. And then when you sort of couple that with USC brand and the network and the relationships, and Bowden talked about that of what the meaning of a degree from a place like USC is, because that alumni network can sort of set you up for life, whether football works out or not. And then you sort of couple that with the pedigree and being in Los Angeles. Man, on paper, Ryan, they've got everything covered, and it's going to sort of come. And in this world where hopefully things kind of even out with the rev share, I mean, more often than not, SC should be able to get the guy that they want on paper. You sort of really feel that way, given this particular staff. And Savage, just again, with that pragmatic approach, just brought another unique element.
Yeah, 100%. Well said. I don't need to add a ton, but yeah, just another really, really smart relationship building guy. And the last thing I'll say on him, and when you add staff members, as USC should, but when you add them from high profile places and you're able to pluck these guys from programs that are premier programs, and yet you still get them here, sometimes, and I'm not saying this in a detriment at all, but sometimes those guys are just so used to, like, all they do is they're looking at 5 stars, right? Because if they're coming from Notre Dame or Ohio State or they're just looking at the 5-star, 4 stars, the blue chippers, because they're at that premier program and that's what they deal with. Adding someone like Savage to the staff, who had to go through and claw to get 2 and 3 stars to come to Colorado State, and really looking for diamonds in the rough that the other schools maybe were not approaching because they didn't stand a chance to get them. And you look at, I was looking after he got hired, in Colorado State's NIL, even in the Mountain West, was like bottom 5. And so he couldn't even compete with the Boise States and the San Diego States in terms of NIL packages. And so when you add that to your staff and you give him now all these tools, but he said he's still going to approach it like he's coming from that Colorado State lens, it just adds such a different intangible that maybe some coaches would not bring to the table. So I think that's just another element, another layer of the onion, if you will, that's been added to the staff. And so, I think that's a nice little piece to add. And he's a young guy, can relate to the players, as he mentioned. He can know the music, so that helps too. Why not?
No doubt, Ryan. I know we got one more guy to talk about, and I know it's early and we're excited and it's the off season and we're being, very positive. But you wonder here, Ryan, are the ingredients here where when they take that staff photo, is this going to be a staff photo that you look 5, 6, 7, 8 years from now and say, man, you remember that 25 SC staff? Like, how crazy was it that X, Y, Z, A, B, C were all on this staff together? I think a lot about, and you being, such a Rams guy as well, Ryan, I think about that 2012 Washington Commanders staff photo, right? I mean, when you had McVay and Shanahan and LaFleur and all those guys on one staff, and you're like, oh my God. I mean, this was like a moment. It almost feels like, like a PayPal mafia, or like it's like the beginning of a great company, like look at all these guys. And you thought of similarly kind of that Alabama staff of, was it 17 when they had Kirby with Saban and Kiff and all those guys, there were like 7 head coaches on that staff. Do you wonder, is this that next iteration, this 25 USC staff that we look back and say, man, that was a special one? And in terms of where all these guys ended up.
Yeah, it's absolutely. I mean, it gets you excited to think that way. That's even like a thought, I think, is great. And that brings us to, the last coach that spoke, Trovon Reed, who, I think this is a guy that's going to be a head coach. I mean, you can just tell the way he talks. He's going to be a head coach somewhere one day, former player. And just another great addition as a cornerback coach, comes from UCF, produced some high quality corners that played in the Senior Bowl. And obviously everyone knows about Chosen Johnson that was originally committed to SC, then goes to SMU, then back to UCF. But he was a part of that team that Trovon Reed helped coach up. And just another, I think, great coach. Talked about how he looks for dogs, fits in perfectly with the theme of dog work, right? That Coach Henny's brought in here. And so that was kind of him talking that. And, but he said a lot of good things, man. I said in there earlier that one of his quotes of, I'm going to turn 3 stars into 5 stars, 5 stars into first round picks. Someone else asked him, like, what do you look for in a recruit? And he's like, I look for dogs that bite. Like, if I have to tell you to bite, you're probably not a guard dog. I want you to be doing that. He talked about how when he's assessing kids. He's going to break them down and essentially what they're good at. He's going to make them great at, what they're bad at, make them good at. And so there's just a lot of, I think, good coaching tangible for someone that's so young in his coaching career. And then you get to the recruiting side and everyone, he's another guy. And you mentioned the pedigree, Madman, of like all these guys seem to be really good at this thing. And he's another guy that's gotten glowing reviews of his recruitment. And you could tell it. Like, he's just a relational guy. It helps that he played in the league. I feel like anytime you have a guy that played in the NFL, like, that's going to help you a little bit more. But you can tell he knows what he's talking about. He brings a passion to his coaching. He talked about, like, he's going to have fun. He brought that up a lot. I'm going to have fun. Like, we're going to have fun. I can already picture Madman, like, knowing Jacoby Lane. And I know maybe people in the fans and maybe even the media don't know, but you can tell behind the scenes, like, he's a chirper. He's a talker. He's your classic receiver that's going to talk. I can already see Trovon Reed, even being a coach, him and Jacoby Lane chirping in practice, having fun. And that's what you want. You want that kind of like almost rivalry between your receivers and your corners. And I think he's going to instill that in that group. And, you know, if you can get that from one press conference, I think that speaks very highly.
No, absolutely, Rye. I think you said it so well. It sort of ties into one of the earlier conversations we had as well with Trovon Reed, and obviously a tremendous resume. And clearly there's an approach to player development, but there was a Dion-ish feel to him, right? Like in terms of sound bites, and he made everything sort of sound good. He had all these great analogies and all just visual imagery to how he spoke. And, you know, to our earlier conversation from a couple of weeks ago, just the Dion element of inspiring kind of another generation, another ilk of coaches. Now, I think Reed is also phenomenal in terms of how he thinks strategically and from an X's and O's perspective. So you can tell he's kind of getting ready to sort of climb that ladder and be a terrific coach and a head coach and run a program. The other thing I really love, Rye, is I think you could argue the best place to sort of start your career in football is being a secondary coach, because I think not only the development of those players, but tactically, you know, the secondary being the back end of the defense, you really have to have an awareness of what the front seven is doing and how you're going to be complementary. But then also there's just such a unique approach that you're looking at opposing offenses as well. So there's this sort of offensive education. There's this defensive education that comes, but then you have to be a culture builder by your very nature, because the cornerback and the secondary position is such, it's feast or famine. And oftentimes, if you're going to sort of get beat, you're going to get beat huge. And how do you sort of just flip the page and not only just go to the next play, but go to the next play with a swagger and a confidence that you are going to be a Hall of Fame shutdown corner, regardless of what just happened 30 seconds ago. So that approach and emphasis of building guys' confidence up, to sort of think about culture in a very unique way. You think about offense in a very unique way, and you think about defense in a very unique way. So he's in the perfect spot right now, both positionally as well as the learning that he's going to get with the rest of the staff. And you put him on a recruiting trip with Henny, Ryan. I mean, my only fear is the recruit's not going to get a chance to even talk three words. That's the only fear at that point, you know. But those two are going to be yin and yang in terms of a recruiting machine there. So very, very exciting.
Oh man, yeah, that's gonna be fun for sure. But yeah, and then last thing I'll say, kind of going with the theme of just guys wanting to be here. And you know, he mentioned how he wanted to be recruited by SC when he was a high recruit coming out. Ended up going to Auburn, but he always wanted to come to SC. And so when the opportunity came, obviously he jumped at it because this is where he's always wanted to be. I thought that was really cool. And he mentioned too, because there's always this like thought of like the SEC hates USC. And he kind of, in lesser words, basically said it's more out of like respect. Like that's USC. Like it's USC. Like people here might, because they're so used to USC in LA. So just like, yeah, it's USC. Like it's part of LA, but like anywhere else in the country, it's like, that's USC. Like that's a brand that people envy. And so if there's hatred there, it's almost out of envy is kind of what he was alluding to. So just goes along with the theme of just these guys just really want to be at the University of Southern California. And then, I always say last thing and then I say another thing. This goes back to our days of the LA football show. Jamal, you know this. We've talked about this before with these coaching hires, and this dates even back to last year, right? Like we know the band's not going to stay together forever. Like these guys, we saw what just happened at Ohio State, right? They win, they lose their OC, their DC, their offensive line coach, like all these guys getting promoted. if you have success and you have a great staff, that's going to happen. And Lincoln Riley said that's what they want to happen. Like, they want to be able to get guys better opportunities if it sees fit, but they also want to be able to build a staff where they're not having a huge loss if that happens. So this is another hire to me that feels like Doug Belk's going to be a defensive coordinator soon.
Yeah.
Very soon. I mean, he was already. So Doug Belk's going to be a DC again. Trovon Reed talked about what a great opportunity is for him to just learn under Doug Belk. He said before the presser, he was in his office going over film, just picking his brain on everything. So this feels like another hire that hopefully doesn't happen in 1 year, but another hire that when Doug Belk becomes a DC, if it is somewhere else, Trovon Reed can now slide in to be your DB coach, and you don't miss a beat necessarily. So that's just been the theme of all these hires, of having those places. And you do that within each company, right? Like, you want guys to go on and succeed, but you don't want your company to crumble if they leave. So you have to have these fortifications of all right, what subsidiaries are going to be able to build them up, back them up, but then replace if needed. And so I think that's another nice fine point.
No, that's a great point, Rye. I think we're seeing sort of the succession planning in real time. To your point, it's such a good one when you talk about the Reed Belk dynamic. I think we've talked about the Lynn Ryan dynamic. I think there's a ton of succession planning, and I think there's also a bit of a dynamic with Bowden and his hires. I mean, when you have sort of 5 directors of player personnel, there's an element of succession planning there too, because these are all kind of young, hungry individuals, very ambitious, very successful. So they're always going to want to sort of go to that next challenge and that next opportunity. And that's always the blessing and the curse of hiring so many A players, is, that fear of sort of losing them. But if you've got that great pipeline that you're building in real time, the beauty of building it in real time is that knowledge transfer, it's that mentorship. So if and when they do move on, at least those principles and those values are there, which is a really nice jumping off point for the successor to be able to take and go with. So just a lot of foresight here. And I think combination, we have to give credit where credit is due, Ryan. I think Lincoln Riley, again, with the staff, but I think this is probably an area where Jen Cohen, because this feels like some Jen Cohen fingerprints now. This is sort of feeling a little bit like the Washington thinking of 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, when Chris Peterson was there. When the way they sort of thought about succession planning, the way they thought about building out their organization. So have to give Jen Cohen credit here. And I think she's on purpose behind the scenes, given her role, but her fingerprints seem like they're all over here. And I'll close with this, Rye. You sort of walk down memory lane a little bit in terms of the nostalgia after a day like this, because so many guys alluded to that 2000s run of just how tectonic it was. And when you talk about Bowden saying that was my childhood team, and you talk about Reed saying, that's where the respect comes from. Look, that 02 to 08, that period, that 7-year period, it is, and to this day has been West Coast football, college football, for the last 45 years. I mean, when you talk about west of the Mississippi, what has happened in the history of the college football, it's been 02 to 08 USC. And the fact that this program was once the face of the sport with one of the most iconic teams, it was something that was very unique and very special. And I think everyone still has a memory of that or some connection to that. And hopefully now we can finally sort of use that to create the next run before the memory of that previous run kind of fades away and you don't have that as a recruiting tool moving forward. So just walked away feeling kind of that nostalgia. And as someone who was at school during that period from 02 to 06, man, oh man, was it magical. And hopefully the magic is upon us soon again.
Yeah, I mean, you lived it. I mean,
Totally.
it's crazy when you see it. And I went to Long Beach State, so I saw it from afar a few years later. And so you can sit and say there was gravity there, that was a special time. But when you hear it and see it over and over from people talking, it's all right, we had the Showtime Lakers, you had Bird Celtics, you had Gretzky, and when he was traded from Edmonton, ends up with the Kings. Then you have 02 to 08 USC. They're in that same breadth of those special sports dynasties and icons, and not just on the actual gridiron, but in pop culture. Like, I think that's what made that USC team so special that people resonate with was, I mean, this was before you had a pro team in LA, and we're getting off the rails. So, but I mean, our good friend Frosty Rucker talks about, like, they're hanging out with the people from the hills and Laguna Beach, and they're going to all these different like comedy clubs. Like, they were the embodiment of LA life and pro football in one, and it was almost a decade period. Oh, and guess what? They won 2 natties and should have won a third. So it was just like, when you really break it down and then you hear everyone talk about it, it will never be replicated again. I don't care what anyone says. It will never be replicated, but it has to get you excited that people want to rebuild that so badly that they're going to do whatever it takes to at least get a glimpse of that. And hey, a natty can give you a glimpse. So I think that's all what you can ask for.
That's all we can ask for. Absolutely, Ryan. You know, it's when you talk about when the world of sports and entertainment colliding, we'll really end it here. I mean, everyone forgets Reggie Bush was dating Kim Kardashian at the time, and Leinart was dating Paris Hilton at the time. So that's all you sort of need to know about that era and how much of celebrities USC football players were in LA.
Insane. So, well, great. Well, hey, we said we're going to go 20 minutes. We're an hour forward. So this was fun. As always, Madman, great to see you. A great day for the USC Trojans in their opening press conference. Spring ball is about a month away or so. Sometime in March, we'll get the announcement here soon. And then, unfortunately, man, we got to wait like 5 months to actually ball again. But hey, we got you covered here at LAFB, USC LAFB. If you haven't already, please hit that like and subscribe button. USC LAFB is the YouTube channel. If you prefer audio platform, Apple, Spotify, just search Salute to Troy. And everything for all your USC needs can be found at LAFBnetwork.com. For the Madman, I am Ryan. Everyone, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to watch and listen. And we'll talk to you all here very, very soon.